The man at the head of the table had 6 seconds to live, and he didn't know it yet. Greta Holloway knew, because she had been hiding behind the supply cart for the past 40 minutes, and she had heard every word. She pressed her back against the cold metal shelving and tried not to breathe. The cart smelled of pine cleaner and old mop water. She had been refilling the hand soap dispensers on the 14th floor when the elevator banks lit up all at once. 6, 7, 8 men stepping out in suits that cost more than her car, and she had ducked into the alcove on instinct, the way small animals duck when something large and fast moves through the grass. She was not small. She knew that. She was 31 years old, 5'4", and built like her grandmother on her mother's side, which meant she was built like a woman who had survived things. The uniform didn't help. It never did. Dark navy, loose in the wrong places, her hair pulled back in a clip she'd had since community college. She was, in the language of this building, invisible. Service staff, part of the infrastructure. She had counted on that invisibility tonight. She was regretting it now. The men had taken the conference room at the end of the hall, Holloway Capital's primary negotiation suite, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, a view of the city that cost $8,000 a square foot. She'd cleaned that room 100 times. She knew where the blind spots were. She knew that the ventilation duct on the east wall carried sound like a telephone wire. She had not meant to listen. But the first voice she heard was speaking in Mandarin, and then a second answered in Russian, and then a third cut across both of them in what she recognized, after a half-second delay, as Georgian, the language of the Caucasus, guttural and ancient and completely, unmistakably clear. Kill the offer. Kill the man if he pushes back. Greta's hand tightened around the handle of the spray bottle. The man at the head of the table was Owen Ashford. She knew him the way she knew all the executives in this building, from a distance, from behind, from the quiet angle of someone whose job was to make rooms look like no one had ever lived in them. He was 43, dark-haired, going silver at the temples, with the kind of jaw that photographed well and the kind of eyes that didn't give anything away. He ran Ashford Meridian, a private equity firm that occupied floors 12 through 15. And he was, according to the building gossip she'd absorbed over 4 years of mopping these hallways, currently in the middle of the largest acquisition of his career. She had not known until tonight that the acquisition involved the Tarev family. She knew the Tarev name. Everyone in this city knew the Tarev name, the way you know the name of a river that's flooded before. Yuri Tarev sat at the far end of the table now in a charcoal suit and no tie, his hands folded on the table like a man at church. He was 71 years old and looked 60 and moved like 50, and Greta had heard his interpreter, a thin, nervous man in wireframe glasses, mangle 3 separate phrases in the last 20 minutes. The interpreter's name, she had gathered, was Prescott. He had the look of a man who had been hired for his credentials and had been coasting on them ever since. Prescott was currently translating Yuri Tarev's last statement as, "Mr. Tarev says he is pleased with the terms and looks forward to a productive partnership." What Yuri Tarev had actually said in Russian was, "Tell the American that if he doesn't move on the port access clause, we will find a way to make this acquisition unnecessary. Permanently." Greta's jaw tightened. Owen Ashford was nodding. He looked like a man receiving good news. His chief of staff, a woman named Reese, who wore her blonde hair in a braid so tight it looked architectural, was taking notes with the composed efficiency of someone who had no idea she was sitting in a room with people who had just threatened her employer's life. There were 3 other men with Tarev. One had not spoken at all and had not needed to. He was built like a residential refrigerator and stood against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes moving. A second spoke occasionally in French to Yuri's nephew, a young man named Pavel who smelled like expensive cologne and boredom. The third, the one who had spoken Georgian, was older, compact, watching Owen with the particular attention of a man taking inventory. Greta understood with a clarity that felt almost physical that Owen Ashford was about to agree to something that would end him. She also understood that she should stay behind the supply cart. She stayed behind the supply cart for another 90 seconds. Then Prescott mistranslated again, this time rendering a direct threat about Ashford Meridian's overseas holdings as a minor concern regarding logistics, and Greta stood up, straightened her uniform, and walked into the conference room. The silence was immediate and total. 8 men looked at her. Reese looked at her. Owen Ashford looked at her with the expression of a man who has just seen something appear in a place where things do not appear. "Excuse me," said the refrigerator-shaped man, stepping forward. He said it in English, but his accent was thick and his tone was not a question. "Who let the cleaning woman in here?" "I let myself in," Greta said. She looked at Owen. "Mr. Ashford, your interpreter is mistranslating." "A beat." "I'm sorry," Owen said. "Prescott." She nodded toward the wireframe glasses. "He's been softening Mr. Tarev's statements significantly. What Mr. Tarev just said was not about logistics." Prescott made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a cough. Who is this person?" "She's staff. She's cleaning staff. She can't possibly." "One govore pravdu," said the Georgian man quietly. "She's telling the truth." He said it in Russian. He had not meant for her to understand it. Greta looked at him directly. "I know," she said in Russian. Then she switched to Georgian. "And I know what you said about the port clause." The room went very still. Yuri Tarev, for the first time since she had entered, looked at her with something other than dismissal. It was not warmth. It was the particular attention of a man reassessing a situation. "Tu davai," he said. "Who are you?" "I clean offices," Greta said in Russian. "14th floor, mostly. I've been here 4 years." "Покему вы здесь? Why are you here?" She looked at Owen again. "Because your interpreter just told him you were pleased with the terms. You weren't." A long silence. Owen was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Something between shock and a very careful kind of attention. "What did he actually say?" Owen asked. Greta told him. All of it. The threat about the port access clause. The comment about making the acquisition unnecessary. The Georgian aside about the overseas holdings. She kept her voice level and her eyes on Owen's face, and she did not look at Prescott, who had gone the color of old chalk. When she finished, the room was so quiet she could hear the ventilation system. Owen said, "Reese." "Yes," Reese said. "Get Prescott out of here." Owen, Prescott started. "Now," Owen said. Prescott left. The door clicked shut behind him with a sound that felt final. Yuri Tarev said something in Russian. Greta translated without being asked. "He wants to know where you found her." "Supply closet, apparently," Owen said. He was still looking at her. "What's your name?" "Greta Holloway." "Miss Holloway." He said it carefully, like he was testing the weight of it. "Do you want to sit down?" She looked around the table. 8 men in suits worth more than her monthly rent. A glass wall showing a city that had never once looked at her directly. "I'll stand," she said. "Thank you." She stood through the next 2 hours. It was not simple. Nothing about it was simple. Yuri Tarev was not a man who made things simple. He spoke in layers and implications, and twice he said things to Pavel in a lowered voice that he clearly did not expect her to catch. She caught them both. The first was a direction to stall on the Meridian clause until Ashford's financing window closed. The second was a comment about a name, Holbrook, and a date 3 weeks out, said in Georgian with the brevity of something prearranged. After the second one, she interrupted the conversation. "Mr. Ashford," she said, "they're stalling. The financing window, when does it close?" Owen went very still. "How do you know about the financing window?" "I don't. He does." She nodded at Tarev. "He just told his nephew to hold the Meridian clause until it closes." Owen looked at Tarev. Tarev looked at Greta with an expression that had passed through surprise and arrived somewhere that looked almost like respect. "Aushin umno," Tarev said. "Very clever." "Spasibo," Greta said. "Thank you." A pause. Then, unexpectedly, Tarev smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that didn't travel to the eyes, but it was real. He said something else. He says, Greta translated, that he hasn't spoken to someone who understood him correctly in 4 years of doing business in this country. Owen said, tell him I empathize. She told him. Tarev laughed, a short, actual laugh, the first real sound he'd made all night. The temperature in the room shifted. Not warmly, exactly. This was not a warm room, and these were not warm men. But the quality of the tension changed. The refrigerator-shaped man uncrossed his arms. The Georgian leaned back in his chair by perhaps 2 degrees. Reese refilled water glasses. Nobody commented on the fact that the woman doing the translating was wearing a Navy uniform with a laminate badge clipped to the breast pocket. At 11:40, they reached the port clause. Greta had been waiting for it. Tarev's position, stripped of the diplomatic language Prescott would have wrapped around it, was this. He wanted controlling access to the southern port facility for 7 years, with an option to extend. He was willing to give Ashford Meridian the North Corridor and the processing contracts. But the South Port was non-negotiable. The Georgian had been circling this point all night, testing the perimeter, and Greta had tracked every probe. She waited until there was a pause in the exchange. Tarev saying something to Pavel, Owen reviewing a document. And then she leaned slightly toward Owen and said, quietly, the South Port is the whole thing for him. Everything else is negotiable. If you give him the South Port with a revenue share clause instead of a flat rate, he'll move on the Meridian Holdings question. Owen looked at her. How do you know that? Because he's mentioned the South Port 4 times in 3 different languages, and every time he does, Pavel stops fidgeting. A beat. Owen looked at Pavel, who was indeed very still. Owen looked back at Greta. Revenue share, he said. 15%. Cap it at year 5. You know equity terms. I took 2 years of business school, she said, before I ran out of money. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the table and proposed the revenue share structure in the original English. And then, after a glance at Greta that she would think about later, on the bus home in the dark, he said, Miss Holloway, would you mind translating that directly for Mr. Tarev? She translated it. She kept her voice neutral and her phrasing precise, and she did not editorialize. Tarev listened. He looked at the document. He looked at Greta. He said in Russian, is this man trustworthy? Greta said, I don't know him well enough to say. Tarev said, but you translated for him. I translated accurately, she said. Whether you trust the author is your business. Tarev smiled again, wider this time. He said something to the Georgian, who nodded once. Korosho, Tarev said. Good. He reached for his pen. At 12:14 in the morning, Owen Ashford's largest acquisition in 12 years of business closed. Reese gathered the documents with the careful efficiency of someone who understood she had just witnessed something she would describe differently depending on who was asking. The refrigerator-shaped man put on his coat. Pavel yawned behind his hand. Tarev stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to where Greta was standing near the window. He was taller than she'd realized. He looked at her for a moment with those flat, assessing eyes, and then he said in English, the first English she'd heard him use all night, you should charge more. Then he left. The room emptied in the way that rooms empty after high-stakes things, quickly, with the particular relief of people who have been holding their breath. Reese followed the Tarev delegation to the elevator. The Georgian was the last of them out. At the door he paused, looked back at Greta, and inclined his head. It was not quite a bow. It was the kind of acknowledgement one professional gives another. Then he was gone, and Greta was alone in the conference room with Owen Ashford. He was still at the head of the table. He hadn't moved since Tarev shook his hand. He was looking at the signed document in front of him like a man who was trying to decide whether what just happened was real. Greta began collecting the water glasses. You don't have to do that. Owen said. It's my job. Right now, he said, that seems like the least relevant fact in the room. She set her glass down. Mr. Ashford, how many languages? She paused. 7 fluently. Georgian I can manage conversationally. Russian and Mandarin are strongest. 7. He said it like a number he was converting from a foreign currency. And you've been cleaning offices here for 4 years. Yes. Why? She looked at him. It was a question she had been asked before, and it usually came with a particular kind of pity attached. The what went wrong variety, the implication that a woman with her abilities should logically be somewhere else, doing something else, and that her presence in a cleaning uniform represented a deviation from a correct path. Owen Ashford did not look pitying. He looked, she thought, genuinely curious. Work is work, she said. I needed stable hours. My mother was sick for a long time. A pause. Is she? She passed, last year. Greta picked up the glass again. I've been thinking about what comes next. I have a proposal, Owen said. I imagine you do. I need someone who can do what you did tonight, on a consistent basis. We work across 14 countries. My current interpretation team. He paused. Needs to be reconsidered, apparently. Apparently. I'm not offering you a pity position, he said. I want to be clear about that. What you did tonight it wasn't luck, and it wasn't instinct. You tracked 6 conversations across 3 languages for 2 hours, and you caught things that would have cost this firm its entire Pacific position. I know what that's worth. Greta looked at him steadily. Do you? I'll pay you what it's worth, he said. Not what I think you'll accept. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the glass wall, the city did what cities do at midnight. Glittered indifferently. Went on without her. I'll want it in writing, she said. Of course. Full benefits, not a contractor arrangement. Done. And I'll want to review the current interpretation protocols before I agree to restructure them. I have some thoughts. Owen Ashford, for the first time all evening, smiled. It was a different kind of smile than Tarev's, less controlled, more surprised, like something he hadn't entirely planned. I would expect nothing less, he said. She set down the last glass. She pulled the clip from her hair it had been pulling all night and tucked it into her uniform pocket. She looked around the room she had cleaned 100 times. The table that reflected light, the chairs that cost more than she earned in a month, the window that showed the city she had moved through, invisibly, for 4 years. I'll have Reese send you the paperwork tomorrow morning, Owen said. Send it to me directly, Greta said. I'll read it myself. She picked up the handle of the supply cart and wheeled it toward the door. At the threshold, she paused. Mr. Ashford. Owen. She considered that for a moment. The Holbrook name. The date your Georgian associate mentioned. 3 weeks from now. She looked back at him. You'll want to look into that before then. She left without waiting for his response. The cart's wheels hummed against the hallway floor. The elevator came immediately, as if it had been waiting. On the ride down, she let out a long, slow breath. She thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts at a dry cleaner for 22 years and had told Greta, when Greta was 11 years old, "Don't let them overlook you, baby. Make them look." She thought about 2 years of business school, the professors who had given her A's on every paper and never once invited her to the networking dinners. She thought about 7 languages, learned in rented rooms and public libraries, and the back seats of buses because language was the one thing nobody could take away once you had it inside you. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Greta Holloway wheeled her cart through the marble atrium past the security desk, past the building directory with its long list of firms on floors she had cleaned in the dark. She didn't look back. She already knew what was behind her. What she was thinking about now was what came next. The paperwork in the morning. The protocol she'd been mentally drafting for the last 40 minutes. The 14 countries, the 6 languages she hadn't used tonight that she would certainly use soon. She pushed through the glass doors into the night air. The city was loud and indifferent and lit up like something that had been waiting for her all along. She walked toward the bus stop, the cart locked back in the utility room, her badge unclipped, her hair loose around her shoulders. For the first time in 4 years, she thought finally. I keep thinking about the moment Greta walked into that room. Not the moment she translated the threat. Not the moment Tarev smiled. The moment before all of that, when she was still behind the supply cart, listening, knowing exactly what was happening on the other side of that wall, and choosing whether to say anything at all. That's the moment nobody talks about. Because it would have been so easy to stay hidden. Nobody would have known. The cart would have gone back to the utility room, the deal would have collapsed, and Greta Holloway would have clocked out at midnight and taken the bus home, and that would have been that. Safe, invisible, unchanged. She chose differently. And I think about why. It wasn't ambition exactly. It wasn't even courage in the dramatic sense. It was something quieter than both of those things. A refusal to watch something wrong happen when she had the means to stop it. That's what I'd call integrity. Not the word on a motivational poster. The actual thing, knowing what you're capable of and not pretending otherwise when it matters. Greta had spent 4 years being overlooked. 4 years of cleaning rooms where decisions got made, listening to languages that nobody assumed she spoke, moving through hallways like part of the building. And in that time, she could have let herself shrink. A lot of people do. When the world consistently treats you like you're less than what you are, it takes something, a kind of daily stubbornness, to keep showing up as your full self anyway. To keep learning. To keep being sharp when there's no immediate reward for it. She learned 7 languages in rented rooms and public libraries. Not because someone was going to promote her for it. Not because there was a clear path forward. Because knowledge is the one thing that belongs entirely to you, and she understood that earlier than most people do. That's the part that gets me. Intelligence isn't what you're born with, it's what you refuse to waste. Greta didn't waste a single year of those 4 years. Every negotiation she overheard, every document she passed on her way to refilling soap dispensers, every language she added to the one she already carried. It was all accumulating. The world saw a cleaning uniform. She was building something. And then the moment came, and she was ready for it. That's how cause and effect actually works, I think. Not in the dramatic, overnight way we want it to. It works slowly, invisibly, in the choices you make when nobody's watching. Greta didn't get that boardroom moment because of luck. She got it because she had spent years becoming someone who could handle it, and because when the test arrived, she had the moral clarity to act on what she knew instead of staying comfortable. Owen recognized it immediately. Not her weight, not her uniform, her precision, her judgment. The way she caught what the Georgian said under his breath and held it without flinching. Some rooms take a long time to open, but when they do, you want to be the person who's already prepared to walk through. Greta was.